Welcome to the first of the Plymouth Herald and Western Morning News EU referendum Q&As. We've got just 10 days to go before voters in Devon and Cornwall make their once-in-a-generation decision at the votes, and the polls are neck and neck. So we've got Plymouth Moorview MP Johnny Mercer giving us the answers for Remain, and North Cornwall MP Scott Mann giving us the side for Vote Leave. So we've got quite a wide range of questions from our readers today, but to start off, each of you have 60 seconds to make your case that either in or out. So I think we're starting with you, Johnny.
Go on, Johnny, pitch.
60 seconds starting now.
I think this is a very clear choice here. I absolutely see the problems with the European Union. I'm not a massive fan of the European Union. I think there are serious problems around immigration, around employment, certainly in the southern parts of Europe. But you cannot find a single person who says there's not going to be some sort of economic shock. However long that may be is up for debate. And for me, it's always the same people who get hit every time something in Westminster goes wrong, every single time that there's some sort of economic downturn. And it's those that I come up here to represent, the sort of bottom 20%, the most vulnerable in Plymouth, and I'm simply not prepared to do it for them. I think there are other arguments around security. I think, do we really think that in a more dangerous and a more diverse world we're better off going alone? I don't think that's the answer. But fundamentally, the single most important thing when fighting things like deprivation and poverty and things like that in Plymouth is having a job and the economy, and I'm not prepared to risk it by leaving the European Union.
Fantastic, just within. Well then, and your turn, Scott, starting now.
Thank you. Well, I obviously don't see leaving the European Union as being a risk. I think the European Union is undemocratic, unaccountable and unelected, and I think it's about time that we took back control for our own country. We have British judges in this country that are making decisions on laws that are being overridden. We've got a parliament that's being overridden by the European Parliament, and for me this is about Britain standing on its own, about us taking decisions that are in the best interest of this nation. And Johnny made the point about the people that are kind of in the lower wage bracket. I think they've been adversely affected by high levels of immigration into the UK, and I think that wages would actually rise. And I know the president of Britain Stronger has said that he believes that wages would actually rise if we came out of the EU. So I think, from my point of view, and the small businesses that I represent in North Cornwall, I think we should leave.
Okay, well then, that's both kept perfectly within the 60 seconds. Well, the first question we've got is from Sue, it's on the NHS. She asks, how is staying in good for the NHS given the pending TTIP deal, which threatens to open up NHS up to competition? So for anyone who's not aware, that refers to the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which opponents of the deal, which is being made between the US and the EU at the moment, are afraid that it'll open up contracts with public services like the NHS up to private companies in the US. So first one for you, Johnny, how is the NHS safer in?
Look, I think Sarah Wollaston is one of the clearest advocates you're going to get on this. I think you're more likely to meet someone from the EU actually looking after you in the NHS than before you in the queue. If you were to take all the EU workers out of my hospital at Derriford, for example, not only in unskilled labour but in the skilled labour as well, it just wouldn't be able to function. There are challenges around TTIP, but ultimately, is this privatisation of the NHS? No. Is introducing some sort of competition to make sure we are getting best value for money in the tariffs across the NHS a good idea? Yes. So that we get better value for money for our taxpayers. But look, ultimately, you've also got Chris Grayling and other people on Scott's side of the argument actually saying TTIP's not going to have any effect on whether we're in or out of the European Union. So I don't think that's an issue. I think it's very clear to me that if we are going to staff an NHS that needs to look after our people in Plymouth and across the United Kingdom, immigration has done some great things in that department.
Okay, and how do you respond?
Well, I think, to be honest, I think the whole idea of TTIP and the NHS is a bit of a red herring. Right. But I think wedding ourselves into a big transatlantic trade deal probably suits some of the large corporations, some of the big companies. Unfortunately, most of the Southwest is predominantly made up of small business, and many of those small businesses face regulation. According to the European Commission's own guidance, it's about 10 times more regulation than some of the big businesses. And they have legal teams, they have compliance teams to meet within the framework that the EU sets down. So I think the transatlantic trade deal was undemocratic, and I think it would be much more productive to have a free trade deal with the rest of the world. You know, I don't see why we should tie ourselves into a trade deal with the second. Antarctica is the slowest growing continent in the world at the moment, and then Europe. You know, why should we tie ourselves into a trade deal with the second slowest growing continent when there's a whole world of trade out there that we could effectively do if we made our own trade deal rather than being wedded into something that's really slowing our economy down.
Because just coming back to the question of the NHS, because you made the point about how reliant the NHS is on migrant workers and employees coming over to the South West. Do you have any concerns that worry you?
Yeah, at the moment, the figures for immigration into the UK are about 330,000 people a year. Half of those are from inside the European Union and half are outside, and we have no control over the ones that come inside the EU. Now, if we have got some pressures on the NHS, I agree with Johnny completely that we have a problem with recruiting the right people. But if we have an Australian-based point system, we can recruit the right kind of people to fill those vacancies in the NHS, and I think that would be a good thing for our economy. You know, I think if we had skill-based labour, then we could effectively coordinate, you know, NHS dentists, cardiologists, all the sorts of people that we need to bring into the NHS to be able for it to function in a much more effective way.
But more, you know, Australia had high levels of immigration last year, but using this system, I think that, you know, immigration is a huge challenge in this debate. I think, do you want us to speak about that later? Are we getting onto it?
I was just going to move on because we did have a question from Phil Williams who's saying that with things like the NHS, schools, prisons, and housing at breaking point, basically how many more immigrants can we comfortably accommodate in this country?
Look, immigration is a really, really big issue, particularly to people in Plymouth. And the idea that you can plan public services on uncontrolled migration is a myth. It's the National Health Service, it's not the International Health Service, and we need to work a lot harder to make sure that we're getting people in that we need, that we want, and that we're not sort of overflowing our public services who are there for the communities that I represent. That said, leaving the European Union is not going to do any of that, because actually more people come into this country from outside the EU than with inside the EU. So look, immigration across the world, you're going to see with, across the world with people who have more access, more awareness of other countries, more mobile, you are going to see immigration is going up everywhere. It's a world challenge that we have to stand up against, and no one's burying their head in the sand from that. But leaving the European Union, I don't think is the answer.
Okay, I mean, how do you come back to that? Because obviously you mentioned that the point system that your side is kind of putting forward.
Well, at the moment, Kate, the way I see it, we don't have any control over immigration inside the EU, and that's a massive problem. I mean, when David Cameron went over to make his Bloomberg speech, he talked about having some control over that, and then he went over to make his deal in January, and unfortunately, what he came back with was very little, actually, and it was at that point that I just thought to myself, if we don't have any control over our laws and our finances and on immigration, then frankly I think we're better off outside of this club, and we don't have any control over immigration, and no one on the inside is actually making a case on how we can control immigration, because the whole purpose of the European Union, this political union that we've joined, is about the ability for people to be able to move around Europe, and you know, we're a small country.
I don't agree that there's no controls on immigration. I think, you know, we are taking steps to get there. You know, migrants coming over here having to work before they take from the state and things like that. You know, that is the direction of travel. Is controlling immigration better? Are we in a good place? Not at the moment, but we're heading in that direction. Is the answer to cut us off and leave the European Union? No.
Okay, because you kind of touched on it in your answer, but another concern that was raised by a few people was about democracy and sovereignty in the EU and back over here. Jason Shopland was asking why should we vote, well, basically why should we vote to remain under the rule of unelected EU presidents rather than for kind of greater autonomy back here. Another well-readers, Piotr, said that currently the EU can overrule British courts, impose sanctions and demand change in legislation, so he's talking about the European Court of Justice. Should we vote to regain sovereignty? How do you respond to that one, Johnny?
About being overruled from Brussels, there are times where, you know, court judgments have gone against us and we have to make sure we comply with European legislation, but they're far, far outweighed by the times where that doesn't happen. And if you're going to have a group of states that provide you access to the common market, you are going to adhere to some sort of set of rules. Now, do I have a problem with having a law in this country and it being overruled by Brussels? Of course I do. Do I have a problem that you have unappointed people within the European Union? Of course I do. But this isn't about, do you love the European Union? This is about, look, is the best thing to do to leave and press your nose up against the window, see everything that's going on and then react to it, or stay within that organisation and actually lead change to make it a better organisation that works better for Britain? And that's why I think we should remain.
Okay.
What was the name of the first chap on?
Talk about the courts.
Yeah.
About, courts was Piotr.
Okay, so I think that they're absolutely spot on. That's my predominant reason. My biggest issue isn't immigration. It's about us having control over our judicial system and our parliament. So I'm responsible for about 50% of the laws that are made in this place, and 50% of them can be overruled in another place. Now, when I go to the ballot box in 5 years' time, or 3 years, 11 months' time now, I want people to hold me to account on the decisions that I've taken. And if I'm only responsible for 50% of those decisions, and 50% of them are overruled somewhere else, then that's not really direct accountability, and that's my biggest issue. I also think that we have British judges to make decisions about British laws, and I think that why do we need another tier that sits on top of that to then overrule people that make democratic decisions in this country? For me, sovereignty is the biggest issue in this whole debate, and I know it might not be for everybody. I know there are people that have got big concerns about immigration. They've got big concerns about the financing and the amount of money that we spend. But for me, it's about us having control over our democracy and our courts and our.
Mate, I absolutely get that sovereignty thing, and this idea that people who want to remain are sort of I've been labelled a traitor and all this stuff is just absolute rubbish. The fact is that I would strongly dispute the fact that it's 50-50. I think I would concede there are times when we are overruled by Brussels, which is not, which is not good enough for people like me who, believe in our rights as a sovereign country. But the idea that we leave the European Union and leave the ability to affect change within that group and that open market and everything that else is going on, in order to mean that we have this sort of myth of full control, which I think we've actually got anyway. I don't think it's the right thing to do, but
you're not a traitor. Look, we've both come down on different sides of this argument, and it's not an easy thing. I know there's a lot of people out there that are undecided at the moment. There's an awful lot of people that have made their minds up. We've all got to search within ourselves to work out what we want to do as a country. But the thing that we've got is we've got a democracy in this country. We've asked the people what they think, and
we ride by the result. We get on with it post 24.
It's quite interesting because a few people were asking questions about how closely an MP's views should reflect those of voters, if they should at all, which again relates to kind of similar questions of, is a decision like this really one to put to the public, or is it something that our elected representatives in Parliament should be doing? So,
okay.
do you believe, is this the right question?
Well, look, I'm vice chairman of the local democracy group in Parliament. So, from my point of view, I believe that town, parish, city, county councils, they should all have a say, and I believe that on an issue that this fundamental, people haven't had a say on this since 1975. It's a very, very long time. We've got a whole generation. You're younger than me, Johnny, aren't you? Just.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's people that have grown up, in Europe, and they've never had a say on this. And I think it's about time that we do have a say.
Yeah. Look, you can't argue with democracy, right? That and the people, what the people want is what the people get. It's not this place is of the people for the people. It's not it's not some sort of ruling elite that people maybe thought it used to be. Look, I think, of course, an MP has got his duty to represent their constituents. That's the reason we're here. So we don't. People like me and Scott, I think, don't come up here with these sort of grand ideas, having, knowing the answer to everything. We rely very heavily upon our constituents and our associations and our offices to help us make the right decisions for Plymouth and for North Cornwall. So absolutely people should have their say. Absolutely we should represent them. Now on this particular issue, it's very difficult to do that because you've seen in the polls, it's right down the middle. And so you will hear an awful lot of people wanting to leave, and you'll also hear an awful lot of people, particularly young people and businesses, who want to remain. So, I believe I'm representing my constituents. Scott believes he's representing his. We'll find out on June the 23rd. and whatever the result, we'll take it on the chin and get on with it.
To be honest, we've only ever been asked what our opinion is. You know, from my point of view, whenever a journalist has contacted me and said, what do you think? You know, I've been speaking for myself about how I'm potentially going to vote, not how my constituents are going to vote. Incidentally, I think Cornwall is very Eurosceptic. You know, we've been hit very hard with the fishing industry over the years. I think our farming industry, although they are heavily reliant on the CAP funding, they're generally quite Eurosceptic, and I think that they would much prefer to have a British agricultural policy that met some of the criteria that the CAP did, but allowed them to do a lot more with some of the kind of funding that they could potentially get if we got back the $3 billion that we currently give to Europe, that we use to fund European farmers.
Okay, so another interesting question we had was from Chrissy in Southwest Cornwall. She says, over the past few years, the government has increasingly cut benefits for the disabled. If Britain leaves the EU, will this give the government carte blanche to reduce them further? So I think she's referring to certain protections that are provided under things like the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU, and also under the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU that protects people with disabilities and ensure kind of equalities and human dignity. So I suppose I'll put that one to you, Scott.
Okay, so what I would say on that specifically is I think that there have been some good things that the European Union have done, like the Working Time Directive. I don't think anyone would say that that's not a bad thing, but we could have something that sits alongside that reflects the general shape of the policy there. But the beauty of it would be a British Working Time Directive rather than a European one. So we could take the good parts of the things that work within the European Union and implement them in Britain. But like I said, the beauty of that would be it would be our pieces of legislation rather than pieces of legislation that were made by somebody else. And there are obviously issues about was it a lady that made those? What was?
Yeah, Chrissy.
Chrissy made the point about the disability cuts. The beauty about if she thinks that we've done a bad job, she can get rid of us at the next election. Unfortunately, we've got people that sit in Europe that make these decisions on our behalf that we can't get rid of. So. From my point of view, at least we're democratically elected and accountable. And if for whatever reason they don't think that we've done a good job for whatever reason, then they can get rid of us. But yeah, like I said, we could implement policies for the British government rather than policies that are from Europe.
How would you respond to Chrissy?
I'd respond to that by saying that I don't accept that this government has made savage cuts to disability benefit. People, we all need to accept that we now have a government, as opposed to the previous government in 2010, that believes in looking after our most vulnerable and providing a ladder of opportunity for people to get them into work, because the single biggest driver in improving their life chances, their quality of life, their deprivation and so on, is having a job. And that's gone up significantly, and I would challenge all the time, as I do in Plymouth, if there is somebody in Plymouth who is disabled, who feels that they are worse off under this government, then they must come and see me, because I simply don't accept that. Has the European Union got much to do with that? Look, there's no doubt there's workers' rights and so on that have come from the European Union that are a good thing. Could we replace them with a British equivalent? Look, I think you could theoretically, but these things are going to take time. What happens in that time is a contraction. What happens is that people don't get looked after, and it's always the same people who get hit, the most vulnerable people, those who are on disability benefits. And look, people like me are in this job to make sure that the most vulnerable, those who are disabled, those who find life a struggle, that they have the same chances and opportunities as everybody else. So this sort of cutting disability payments line, I accept that the government has reduced some disability payments, but the truth is they're being focused on schemes that work, and they're being focused on those that really need them, and that is what people voted for at the general election.
Okay, just to quickly touch on something Johnny said, about what happens in the meantime if we do vote to leave the EU, to those protections for workers' rights, for women's rights, for disability rights. I mean, do you...
Well, Johnny alluded to the fact that there would be, I wouldn't call it a seismic shock. I think there will
Did
be...
I say that?
Yeah, you did earlier on.
Did
You
I?
said a seismic shock. But I think there would be a period of uncertainty, all right? And I don't know how long that period would last. It might be 6 months, it might be 12 months, until we get the deals that we're looking for within the European, with the European Union and outside in the free, in the free world trade deals. So there will be a period of uncertainty. But from my point of view, I'm not voting for the next 6, 12 or 18 months. I'm voting because I think that outside the European Union our economy would grow a huge amount faster over 5, 10, 15 years. And I think, we've
What if
both
it
got young
doesn't?
children.
What if it doesn't?
Well, it
It's
might,
a nirvana. You don't know it's going to.
it's not growing in the EU now.
No, but it's the fastest growing country in the EU at the moment.
What?
The British economy.
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah. So why are we going to throw that away for some sort of idea?
Well, we're not growing fast because we're in the EU.
No, but
We're growing fast
we're
because
growing
we're
fast.
a great
It
nation.
doesn't matter why we're growing fast. We're growing fast.
Well, that's true. That is very, very
So
true.
you're going to throw that away for something
I
that you
don't-
just don't know what's going to happen.
Look, I don't think we're going to throw that away. The reason
Tell
the
me
British...
the economy's going to do
Hang on a
better,
sec.
and I'll switch sides.
Well, that's good
Tell me
news.
the
I think I
economy-
got him.
Tell me, right? Tell me
So-
the economy will be doing better, and we will look after the most vulnerable better, and I'll switch sides.
Okay, so from my point of view, the great British people are the ones that drive the
Yeah,
economy
mate,
in
this
this country.
sounds great. This sounds great. The great British people. I believe in that stuff too.
Yeah.
But that's not going to pay people's bills. That's not going to reduce the cost of shopping. That's not going to help people get into work.
Why do you think the EU reduces our shopping bills?
Because it's all about it's all if we've talked about the value of the pound, people have mentioned the value of the pound, what's going to happen to it and to our imports if we leave the European Union. All this stuff is really important to
Well,
people.
of course it is. Of course it is, but maybe wages will go up. Maybe food
Maybe,
prices.
maybe,
Yeah, but
maybe.
how do we have a job to make predictions about what's going to happen to the economy in 6 months' time? How on earth do you think we can make predictions about what's going to happen 10, 15, 20 years down the line? But what I would say to you is, it's our destiny, alright? If we're inside the EU, it won't be our decision to take, it'll be somebody else's.
Well, I hate to interrupt, that's quite an interesting debate. We do have a couple more questions I'll try and fit in. One is from Rosie from South Devon, who asked about the future of Erasmus scheme. So that's basically opportunities for students, volunteers, teachers, apprentices to train and work abroad. She says the EU contributes to educational exchange schemes for students and these people. What is the future of these schemes if we leave the EU?
Okay.
Scott?
So, first of all, it's not the EU's money, it's our own, alright? We're just recycling our own money back. We can say the EU gives us so much money. There's a dispute about the bus and whether we, gross pay or net pay. Look,
Is that 350 million thing?
Yeah,
I haven't
yeah.
heard that dispute. What is that?
Johnny, look, if someone asks you how much you get paid, do you tell them gross or do you tell them net?
I don't tell them.
Okay. Well, look, most people when they talk about this kind of stuff, they talk about the gross figure, but let's deal with the net figure. So it's £9 billion a year. That's £9,000 million a year. That's an awful lot of money that we give to the European Union that we don't see again. We have a lot of money that we hand over at the moment that we could effectively utilise to put into projects like this. I hear people in Cornwall talking about the amount of money they've received in funding in the past. There's no reason to say that those things are going to stop. The common agricultural policy at the moment, we give the European Union net about £3 billion a year to subsidise farmers in European countries to compete against our own. This sort of stuff is complete nonsense.
We get £3 billion a year as part of the common agricultural policy. George Eustace has said that if we leave, we'll get £2 billion a year. So that's a billion short. That is a lot of money to subsidising farmers in Cornwall.
But we give them 6 and we get 3 back. So the other 3 disappears and supports farmers on the continent.
Well, it doesn't disappear. It goes into all of these separate projects that actually Cornwall is a net benefiter from.
I don't know how that could work.
Just to take it back to Erasmus quickly, experts have said that without the European scheme, they would genuinely struggle to get students studying overseas. Do you have any concerns? Plymouth obviously has a big
Of course, we've got a massive student population in Plymouth, and the opportunities for going and learning and being a student in Europe are huge. And it's just another part of the casualty list, I'm afraid, if you leave the European Union, that you can just chuck the Erasmus programme on top of the rest of it with a healthy economy and a strong defence. And but it might be all right. Don't worry, because Scott said it might be all right.
No.
So let's give it a go. Yeah.
Well, look, like I said to you, we would have this money back, so we could invest it the way we'd like to invest it. And as for students moving backwards and forwards across the EU, there wouldn't be a free movement of people, but there would be a visa-based system where people could apply to come to countries and go to countries, and that's effectively how it works in other countries that sit outside the EU, and I think how it should work in the UK.
Okay, final very quick question. Bill in Plymouth asks about research. He says science now relies quite heavily on EU funding and National Research Council funding has gradually dwindled. If the UK pulls out of the EU, how on earth is science to be funded?
Okay, so once again, EU funding. It's not EU funding, it's our own money coming back to us.
You could get some of that £350 million you keep going on about.
Well, it's actually...
It isn't like £350 million you spent 4 times over
It's
already.
actually...
Maybe some of that could go to science.
£350 million would build a new general hospital in the east of Cornwall in a week. You know, it's a huge amount of money, right? It's not £350 million a week net, it's £185 million. £175 million net a week.
No, right? I know, I'm being slightly flippant. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But we have to, and people have to decide whether they think, the money and the security and the economy and the travelling around Europe, the Erasmus and the science and the arts, whether all that is worth what we pay. And yes, we lose a bit of, this idea that people can overrule us is not something I'm comfortable with. This free movement of people, uncontrolled migration is something in Plymouth we're extremely comfortable with. But it's a balance, and is that price worth paying for that security and everything we've talked about? And people like me think it is, people like Scott think it isn't. We have a referendum, we move on.
But that's the most fundamental thing, isn't it, Johnny? That, we talked about the arts and how that money's funded, that's all fine. But ultimately it's not our decision to make. It's not our money. We hand it over, we get some back, they tell us how to spend it. The way I talk about it when people ask me is it's like walking into a shop in Plymouth. Walk into a shop in Plymouth. The chap on the door says it's £20 to come into my shop, so you give him the £20. He gives you £10 in vouchers and then tells you what to spend in his own shop in the shop. That's the way the EU works. They give us money back and then they put criteria on how we spend our own money, and it's wrong.
Okay, well unfortunately that's all we have time for today. I know that you have a very important meeting at number 10 to get to, so I'll wrap this up. But thank you both for taking part, and also we will hopefully have some details of our second Q&A online shortly.